Well, in case you haven't noticed, we're not in the Pacific Northwest yet. We're still in Utah. In fact, where I've brought you today is into the shadow of This Is the Place monument, the original scene of the crime here. And the reason I'm up here today is because we need to talk about something that's going on that's really important. And I'm going to try to do my best to do an objective, fact-based analysis of why this is probably not the place for the world's biggest data center project. So let's get into it. The reason we're up here is because this gives us a good vantage point out over the whole Salt Lake Valley. And from the south down there where Kennecott is, which Kennecott Copper Mine is going to factor into my discussion as we go along here, up to the north end of the valley where the Great Salt Lake is. Now on the very, very north end of the Great Salt Lake is Box Elder County. And in Box Elder County, they just approved plans for, or a permit for, what is to be the world's largest data center project. These numbers are mind-blowing and staggering, so we're going to run through them here. But we're talking 40,000 acres. So the reason that I am going to talk about this is because, first of all, not many people who don't live in the Salt Lake Valley or in Utah or haven't visited here and paid much attention really understand the importance of the Great Salt Lake in terms of our greater Wasatch Mountain ecosystem here. So we're going to go through that a little bit just to set the stage so you'll understand how important the Great Salt Lake is, even though it's not a great place. It's salty and stinky and has brine flies all around it, but it's very important to our larger ecosystem here in terms of water and snow in the mountains, which, you know, is, go away. If Gray just saw me swat that bee, I'll be in trouble. So anyway, because we know you're probably not from here, we're gonna run through this a little bit so you can get kind of a basic understanding of this Great Salt Lake ecosystem and its impact on the mountains here, industry, people, environment, all that stuff. We're going to cover all that briefly, give you a quick understanding to it. Then we're going to run through some of the numbers and some of the impacts that are expected to come out of this data center project, and going to explain why we're opposed to it. Okay, strap in. I got to give you a quick history lesson. I'll try to keep it brief here, but about, let's say, roughly 30,000 years ago, there was this massive lake that filled up most of northern and western Utah, and we've named it Bonneville Lake. And it was this big, deep lake that covered all this area where today are the Salt Lake City and Ogden and Provo. All that was underwater, hundreds of feet of water. Eventually, the Bonneville Lake got big enough that it broke out to the north and kind of broke through a small point up there and flooded out in this massive flood that carved out the bulk of the Snake River Canyon and even up into Hell's Canyon. This was a huge, major flood event. And when the flood waters were done kind of pouring out of this massive lake, we were left with basically the Great Salt Lake, a little puddle, in essence, at the bottom of what used to be this great big lake, and everything kind of shrunk down into there. So what we have here is we've got a very shallow lake. It has no outlet. It's basically got three rivers feeding into it. The Bear River to the north, the Weber River kind of northwesty or northeasty, and the Jordan River essentially coming in from the south. This map is not to scale. But because of the fact that water comes in and can't leave, the only way it can leave is through evaporation. So everything that comes in with the water and everything that was here as the water drew down as Lake Bonneville flooded out winds up being a high collection of salts and minerals. And that just continues to build over time, over the thousands of years that the Great Salt Lake has been here. It just keeps getting a more concentrated collection of these salts and minerals. So that's why the Great Salt Lake is one of the saltiest bodies of water that we know of. It's not the saltiest, but it's pretty darn salty. You can float in it without even trying. You just bob around in there basically. It's really shallow. At the most, it's like 15, 16 feet deep. And again, the bottom of the lake is pretty flat. Okay, so let's basically run through quickly, just this is a refresher, I'm sure, from grade school, how the water cycle works in the world at large. So if we're looking at the Great Salt Lake in particular here, we've got these rivers flowing into the lake. And everything that comes in just raises the surface of the lake because, again, there's no outlet, so there's nowhere for it to go. So if there's a heavy runoff from the mountains, it's raising the lake up, covering up the shoreline, filling it up, and the water just stays there. And then evaporation comes along, the sun shines on the water, warms the temperature up, evaporates it up into the clouds. And just a important thing to know is this evaporation takes place all year long because the lake is so salty it can't ever freeze. So you've got this evaporation that's now seeding the clouds with a lot of moisture, and as they flow across and bump into the Wasatch Mountains, that rising air forces the condensation to precipitate that water out in the form of snow. And that's how we get our world's greatest snow that everybody likes to fly in from all over the world to ski on in the winters in the Wasatch Mountain Range. Now, here's what's going wrong with the lake. Is all across the Wasatch Front, we have all of this growth going on in terms of more people, more houses, more businesses, more draws on those freshwater rivers that would typically be feeding the lake. So that's the first kind of point of weakness in our closed loop system here for the Great Salt Lake. So the Bear River, for instance, up north is the water, people want to take the water out for new houses and to water alfalfa. And now there's a billionaire moving in and wants to take a bunch of it for a data center. So the rivers are getting new demands, increasing demands placed on their water flows before they ever make it to the Great Salt Lake. So the what used to be fairly robust rivers flowing in to fill the lake up are now a fraction of their normal inflow because the water all got taken before it got here. And then you have to combine that with warming atmospheric conditions in the form of climate change. Whether or not you believe it's real, it is, it's happening. And the air's warmer. And so the evaporation out of the lake is happening at a greater rate than it used to. And so what you have is less water going into the lake and more water evaporating up out of the lake. And the end result is the surface of the lake is going down. And each tiny increment in the surface of the lake going down results in these huge expanses of dried out shoreline around the perimeter of the lake. So I want to talk about this shoreline for a second because there's an important aspect of this that we need to be aware of when we're thinking in terms of why should we care about the Great Salt Lake. So I went back and poked through some imagery on Google Earth and found this particular image from 1984. If you recall, 1983 was the year that Lake Powell almost went over the dam, and those early 80s were some years of extremely high runoff in the Wasatch Mountain ranges. And so the Great Salt Lake was essentially, full to what is kind of the historical norm for this area. So the normal full is what this was, or close to it in the early 80s. So you can see the size of the lake here. And now if we superimpose over that imagery from, this happens to be from 2021. So this is kind of old, 5 years old here. But you can see the change in the shoreline, the amount of shoreline that's exposed between the early 80s and the early 2000s. And this problem just continues to get worse. I have brought you out to the shores of the Great Salt Lake. As you can see behind me, we got some cattails, and in the distance behind us over there is salt air. And if we scan around, I don't know if we'll be able to see it, but over my right shoulder is the tailings pond from Kennecott Copper Mine.
So we're going to do a little experiment here today. We're going to see if we can help you understand how this lake works and why those of us who live here are worried about its future. So what we're going to do is we're going to head that way. We're going to see if we can get to the water.
Okay, Editor Don here with you. When I shot this video of me marching across the sand out towards the water, I thought to myself, you know, when I put this in the video, I'll snip this down or I'll speed it up way up, and I don't want to bore people. But I'm going to leave the whole thing in here and let it play down in the corner, because I think this is something that you need to understand. The camera was already shooting in time-lapse mode, or hyperlapse they call it, so it was only taking a shot, a picture every couple of seconds, and so this is already compressed down. I walked almost half a mile from the parking lot out to the water, and I walked across, for all intents and purposes, a flat plain of mud. So this is really critical, I think, to you understanding the impact that more atmospheric heat, climate change heat, and reduced inflows into this lake, the effect it really has. This is what I'm talking about right here. Okay, so rough as it was, I gave you kind of a quick rundown of how this Great Salt Lake ecosystem works, how the closed loop system works. And I'm worried that I haven't given you any reasons to care about the Great Salt Lake. So let me throw a couple things out here that you should maybe want to ponder if you're wondering, why do I care about any of this, Don? Well, you know, let's talk about the ski industry in Utah here. Maybe you're a skier, maybe you're not, but you can probably understand how this gigantic industry of transporting people to Utah and housing them and transporting them around the state and renting them skis and feeding them and all that stuff can be a big economic force in the state and also across the country, because obviously the airlines come from all over, and if people, you know, aren't flying here to ski all winter, then that has an impact on businesses that move people here and move them back out again. So, you know, it matters that we keep that industry healthy. The Olympics are scheduled to be hosted here in Utah again in 2034, I believe it is. And if we continue to have these dry winters with little to no snowpack, I don't know how we're going to pull that off. I mean, if the Olympics had been here this winter, I believe we'd have had to move them somewhere else. I think it would have been a disaster because of the late and low snowfall that we got. So that's just one aspect of things. The health ramifications to all the people that live across the Wasatch Front, if the lake dries up and all that caustic dust starts blowing around, is really going to be bad news. So there's long-term health impacts to this lake drying up. And obviously the development that is exploding everywhere, more houses, more businesses, more land under production, all of that takes water. And we have to have long-term, well thought out, strategic, honest conversations about this stuff. And it doesn't seem like we are right now. And there's environmental impacts that I haven't even touched on yet. You know, on the north end of the Great Salt Lake, for instance, there is the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge. So it's this great big expanse of wetlands that are fed by the Bear River, that all the birds that are migrating north and south use as a kind of refueling point, and a lot of them, you know, will lay their eggs here and so forth. And it's really important to the natural world that we keep those wetlands intact so that the birds have a place to stop on their migration. And maybe you don't care about birds, but you should. So now along comes Kevin O'Leary, the Shark Tank guy, and he makes this deal to get a hold of 40,000 acres on the north end of the Great Salt Lake, and they're ramming this thing down our throats. I heard somebody say the other day, how can you Utah people let this happen? Well, we didn't get any option to let this happen. It happened without us getting a chance to have any input or very little input. They're running it through as a national security kind of project. So the MIDA, the Military Installation Development Authority, I think it is who initially signed off on the project. So the military wants to use this as going to be an AI data center. So, you know, the AI that's going to take over and kill the world, well, it starts here. But basically, this thing got rammed through. No one got any input to the MIDA department. The governor of the state, Spencer Cox, he's all on board. He said he's been out there talking this thing up, and he said, boy, we've got to stop being slow about this stuff. We got to get stuff done fast. Now, we all have kind of figured out that he's got a little benefit that he'll gain out of this. Let's think about what comes along with data centers, right? What are you going to do if you build a data center out in the middle of Utah? Well, obviously you got to have a big fat pipe to bring the internet in there so that all that stuff that gets done by the AI that's running in there can get out to the world. So what does that take? Well, it takes infrastructure in terms of communications lines, fiber optics, and all that kind of stuff. Well, imagine that. Spencer Cox's family business was a communications company, Centacom, I think it is, or Centracom, but Daddy still owns that. Spencer, the governor, did step out and say, okay, I'll divest myself of that ownership of that company, or I'll step back and not run the company while I'm governor. But it's still a family business, and so there's probably billions of dollars of telecommunications stuff that will take place, and his family business seems positioned to be the one who will be benefiting from that. The Box Elder County Commissioners that signed off without really, kept threatening to kick everybody out of their meetings if anybody protested this thing, rammed it through in one or two little short, quick meetings. All three of them voted for it. And now it's starting to look like those guys all got a sizable little chunk of money deposited into their reelection campaigns, bigger, more money than they've ever had, right at the same time that or right after they passed this. So I don't have the facts to say exactly that people are being bribed and bought and sold and so forth to do this, but I'm going to put a bunch of links down in the description of the video because there are investigative reporters from the Salt Lake Tribune, and there's the Utah Rivers Council, and there's other people who are independent researchers that are poking around now, and they're finding that it does start to look like all of the people who had a say in pushing this project through are going to have some direct financial gain as a result of this. The Speaker of the House of Utah, the House Legislature Speaker, has bought 640 acres of land that's right at the interchange off the interstate that's 3 miles north of where this data center will go. Because obviously, what are you going to need if you got this big complex out there? You're going to need probably a new gas station and hotels and some restaurants and probably a whole bunch of stuff. And my guess is that land will become very valuable as it starts to get built up to go along with all this. Now they're talking about this bringing 2,000 jobs into the state of Utah. I rented space in a data center when I had my IT company. And so I know a little bit about what I speak here, okay? Now this wasn't a data center that was 40,000 acres. It was a normal sized data center. But on any given day, there's one, maybe two people inside of a data center, if that. People don't work inside data centers, I'll just tell you that. The only thing inside of there is racks and racks and racks of servers that are sucking up electricity and generating heat as they do their work. So let's talk some numbers on what it's going to take to physically run this thing. Okay, so I had to sit down here so I can look these numbers up. And I'm going to put all my supporting documents down in the description of this video, because you can go check my facts. Please do. And maybe by the time you watch this, some of this stuff will have changed. But the initial estimates are that this data center at full boat would use 9 gigawatts of electricity, which is basically based on 2025 usage for the state of Utah. That's roughly double the amount of electricity that the entire state of Utah uses in a year out of one data center. So where's that electricity going to come from? Well, obviously we can't pull it out of the grid here right now because we don't use that much electricity in the state. So they're talking about generating that power at the facility with natural gas powered turbines. So natural gas turbines, they're basically talking about, if you run the numbers, 448 billion cubic feet of natural gas required to generate that much electricity. That number is 1.5 times the amount of natural gas used by the state of Utah in 2023, roughly. All these numbers are roughly, okay? They're basically saying that this could produce 30 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere and consume 16.6 billion gallons of water per year just to run the turbines. So you get all this electricity, you pump it into this data center, so you've generated the electricity. All those numbers I gave you are just generating electricity. Now you've got these massive banks of servers using all that electricity to crunch numbers, and so they are generating an extreme amount of heat. So now you've got to cool the air that's pumping through that data center, and that's going to take more water. Now Spencer Cox is saying, oh, we've got this magical closed loop system now, so they're only going to use the water once to fill it, and then it just stays in there and runs around in a circle and heats and cools and heats and cools and heats and cools, and no more water has to go in to replace it. Okay, maybe that's true, but we don't really believe all that. Then Spencer said, okay, look, I get it, that's a lot of CO2 and a lot of natural gas, but they're only going to do that in the beginning, and then we plan on powering this thing with nuclear power. So we're going to build a nuclear power plant there or something? I don't know. I haven't really found anywhere where he's elaborated on that. But what do you do when you build a nuclear power plant? You build it on a river or the ocean, so that you have massive amounts of water to use to cool the thing and to generate the steam. So I'm not sure how you're going to do a nuclear power plant without using water. Then where's all that heat going to go? Okay, well, the heat's going to go up in the air. And remember, this territory where they want to put this is right on the northern end of the Great Salt Lake. So where's the heat going to go? It's going to go into the atmosphere right over the Great Salt Lake. They're estimating that it will raise the temperature of the surrounding area by 5 degrees all day, every day, and by 25 degrees at night, because as the sun goes down and the atmosphere would normally cool, this data center is going to continue to spew out these enormous amount of heat. And so the nights will be warmer. So what does that mean for the Great Salt Lake and the Bear River Bird Refuge? More evaporation, more heat, more of the stuff that's already breaking the system now because of climate change. Now, Mr. O'Leary has been on TV saying that we're all running around being Chicken Little and he's accused us all of being people from China who have been bussed in to be paid protesters. Well, I'm not from China. In fact, my dad worked on the fill across the Great Salt Lake before I was even born, that they put the railroad causeway in there. He ran a tugboat and drug the barges out there that hauled the fill out to build the causeway across the thing. I'll put a little picture of it up here to just show you what I'm talking about. But, you know, my family history with this thing goes back to before I was even born. So I'm not from China, but I'm pretty worried about this thing going in here. And again, I'm trying not to be overly dramatic about this. I just don't see how this is going to be a good thing for anybody but the people whose pockets are getting lined by this deal. So Mr. O'Leary will make a ton of money off this, no doubt about it. Will he spend it in Utah? No, he won't. He'll spend it wherever he spends it. And will we collect taxes from him? Nope, he's a Canadian. And so, you know, that money's leaving the country. Spencer Cox, those guys, they're all going to be millionaires, or they already are, and so they're not going to pay much taxes. I just don't see this thing really having, I'm struggling to find any upside to putting this here, other than, boy, wouldn't that be a feather in our cap to say Utah is the current leader in data centers. We're already a pretty big time player in the data center world. I mean, we've got a big NSA data center just over the point of the mountain in Utah County, and they're trying to put one in out in Duchesne County. I think I saw one day that there's 24, either 12 or 24, maybe it doubled the number, but there's a lot of data centers already in Utah, just not of this scale. So it's not like we're not ponying up our resources to fuel this AI boom, but I think this one might be just beyond crazy. And it does seem like all the politicians who are supposed to be representing the interests of the people who elected them have all decided to take the money and run, and the hell with what we think about it. So where does this leave us? Well, we've been protesting in every way that we can. We were able to go in and protest the initial water permit. We all had to go online and file a complaint against the water permit that was going through, and each one of us had to pay $15 to do that. And so they pulled their water permit back. And then the politicians, it looks like, have jiggered the law a little bit so that they can reapply for that same water permit, and none of our protests get to be applied to that. And I believe they're making it more difficult for us to protest it again. The commissioners already locked us out of the meetings, basically said, you know, look, anybody, you people just shut up out there. We don't want to hear your input. And if you continue to shout at us, we're going to kick you out of the room. So they forgot who they worked for, and they didn't take any public input. And the MIDA doesn't have to. And now Kevin O'Leary is running around on TV saying anyone who's against this is in favor of China ruling the world, instead of people like Elon Musk and Sam Altman ruling the world with their AI stuff. So we're still fighting it. We've got really, really ethical people with a lot of integrity who are doing hard work to fight this thing and to educate the public. And I'm going to link up, like I said, as many of them as I can in the description of this thing so that you can go help spread the word and, you know, keep this in the national conversation, because it's important. I'm worried we're losing. I got to be honest with you. I'm worried that we're losing, and this thing is going to go ahead, and in 10 years' time, this area will be looking a lot different than it does right now. Hard to find hope in this situation, especially when the people we elected to take care of things like this and look out for our best interests seem to be following along with the grift that seems to be coming from the very top of our government right now that seems to have been normalized. And nowadays it just seems like if you're a politician, you just get in there and get as much money in your pocket as you can and take the money and run. So sorry for putting together such a long and or complicated and depressing video, but it is what it is. The situation is not a pleasant one. So there you have it. There's my take on the data center. Too big? Yes, I think it's too big. And I don't think this is the place for it.